cross between saloon and a coupe, the Mercedes CLS has pioneered a new niche within the executive sector as a highly distinctive proposition with comfortable room for four, but styling that suggests otherwise. Though extremely refined and silky smooth on the road, it also has a subtly sporty flavour than the E-Class on which it's based. Now let's see if this is you. You've done pretty well in life and you've earned the right to own a prestigious executive car. You'd rather like to have a Mercedes, but not a dull one like the guy over the road drives. If that three-pointed star could be mounted on the bonnet of something that cuts a bit more of a dash, something a bit more cutting edge, you'd be interested. And you'd be Mercedes CLS, target market. This is the kind of car that most of us thought Mercedes would never make. An extrovert, attention-grabbing design that created its own market niche and that supposedly more avant-garde brands are still trying to properly emulate. Now, it's both a coupe and a four-door saloon at the same time, with breathtakingly sweeping lines, razor-edge detailing and superb build quality. At first glance, it looks maybe Italian, possibly American, but anything but German. At its launch here in 2005, it created single-handedly the four-door coupe sector, and most recent models have a small but significant raft of revisions to keep things fresh. The driving experience is certainly more executive saloon than sports coupe, but don't despair. Mercedes haven't merely draped their efficient but rather clinical E-Class saloon in a rather fetching off-the-shoulder number. For a start, this feels more of a driver's car before you even go anywhere. And not only because the CLS's sweeping lines give an impression of power before you've even started the engine. The cabin allows you to sit lower than you would in a conventional plush saloon, and the controls cocoon you nicely behind the steering wheel. There's only one transmission choice, a 7-speed automatic, but it can be very responsive and is available with Lewis Hamilton-style paddles behind the steering wheel. Now, over 83% of UK CLS buyers go for the 320 CDI diesel that I'm driving here. It's got 224 brake horsepower and looks pretty quick on paper, 0 to 60 in 7 seconds on the way to 153 miles an hour top speed. It doesn't feel quite that quick on the road, but with 540 Newton meters of torque to waft you about the place, overtaking pulling power is never in question. So much so, in fact, that you'd have to think twice about paying a huge amount more for one of the petrol V8s. The speed-sensitive steering wakes up nicely once you get going to give decent feedback, but to get the full CLS experience, you really need to pay a little bit extra on lower order models like this one for the Airmatic DC air suspension system. Now, this can adjust itself to the way that the car's being driven, tightening up body roll on twisty country roads like this one, and softening up the suspension if you're on the motorway, racking up the kind of mileage that's really this car's comfort zone. High-tech features are everywhere. The brake discs wipe themselves dry when you activate the windscreen wipers, so they'll be super effective when you need them. There's a hill start gadget to stop you rolling backwards at T-junctions, and a pre-safe function which braces the car for a crash by bracing up the seat belts and closing all the windows. Plus, the car's onboard computer won't allow you to visit your dealer for a service unless you really need to. Where to start? After all, even the door handles look like something from an Art Deco design exhibition. Let's begin with the basics. The CLS is essentially a Mercedes E-Class saloon that sits with more sweeping bodywork that leaves it 41mm lower and 90mm longer. Now, unfortunately, none of that length is in the wheelbase, so rear seat passengers won't be as comfortable as they would be in, say, an E-Class saloon. But then, this is a four-door coupe, and on that basis, the amount of space that it does offer is very impressive, as is the 505-litre boot. Now, in the back, well-to-do family motorists may be a little bit disappointed to find that it's a strictly four-seater arrangement, a chunky transmission tunnel dividing the two rear seating positions. Fortunately, the basic shape hasn't been tampered with too much as part of the most recent round of changes. Basically limited to a revised radiator grille, these LED rear tail lights that sit above a reworked bumper, and shapelier rear door mirrors. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same shape that shocked us all back in 2005, that low nose rising up to meet a windscreen that forms the arc of a roof racing out to meet that fastback tail. You could stand and look at it for ages, from each angle, sensing something different from the designer's pen. Now, with all of this going on outside, you could perhaps have excused Mercedes for taking the easy way out and simply sticking an E-Class interior in the cabin. Perhaps they should have done, because this vast plank of wood that goes across the CLS's dash isn't its most appealing feature. Still, the 3-spoke wheel is good to hold, and of course everything is beautifully crafted. The doors are frameless, which is very coupe-like, and there are lovely coach-built touches like the chromed finish around the edges of the sills. Now, prices range in the £45,000 to £75,000 bracket, so you're looking at a premium of around £8,500 over a comparable E-Class Mercedes saloon. Now, assuming that you see this car as being distinct from either other executive saloons or sports coupes, then there's not a lot to think about in terms of other rivals. Probably the closest car in concept being Volkswagen's Passat CC, a much cheaper car that was inspired by this CLS. If you're on a budget and not hung up on the idea of owning a Mercedes, the Passat CC in its top V6 4Motion 3-litre V6 form could be an option. UK customers who don't want this CLS 320 CDI diesel model usually choose between a 292 brake horsepower 3.5 litre V6 in the CLS 350 CGI, or a 388 brake horsepower 5 litre V8 in the CLS 500. There's also a 514 brake horsepower V8 in the CLS AMG 63 flagship car. Now, all of them come well equipped, as you'd expect. You've got Speedtronic cruise control, you've got 4-zone climate control and leather trim. You can see why so many go for this CLS 320 CDI diesel model, not least because it's going to be worth 56% of what you paid for it after 3 years of motoring, all the while returning a very creditable 37.2 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and putting out 200 grams per kilometre of CO2. The CLS 350 CGI petrol model it returns 31 miles to the gallon, so that's hardly crippling either in the overall scheme of things. But go for one of the V8s and you'll have to budget a great deal more. The CLS 63 AMG, for example, returns 19 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and puts out 345 grams per kilometre of CO2. I mean, Greenpeace could hardly be more offended if you attached a whaling harpoon gun to the bonnet. Insurance, well, that's Group 18 for the 6-cylinder models and Group 20 for the V8s. As a practical 4-door coupe with a cutting-edge sense of style, the CLS remains pretty unique in its market sector. If you like it, you'll love it. Until this model came along, you could aspire to a Mercedes, admire what they did, respect the brand, but rarely form an emotional bond with one of their cars. Now, this car changed all of that, and it remains groundbreaking, not only for the Stuttgart brand, but for the market as a whole.